Hi, folks. So I hope you're able to hear me okay over the lovely gurgling sounds of the river behind me. I am up camping in the mountains in Colorado this weekend, but I wanted to film a video because I have some requests stacking up in terms of things people have wanted me to do videos about. And this was actually a comment on TikTok, and I said that I would do a full video about this because I think it requires a longer explanation than the TikTok platform would really allow. So, first of all, I encourage you, this is around the topic of eating disorders, again, which seems to be a popular topic when it comes to the nutrition world. Understandably. So I encourage you, if you have not watched my previous film on eating, or video on eating disorders, I encourage you to go back and watch it. It's called, What Really Causes Eating Disorders. It should just be a few videos back. And in that video, I talk about some of the physiological factors that can contribute to disordered eating habits. But of course, I acknowledge in that video that there are of course, social and psychological factors that also contribute to eating disorders. And so this video is going to talk a little bit more about that and how to navigate that when you are trying to do a therapeutic or a medicinal diet. So the question was, if you have a history of restrictive eating or restrictive dieting, how can you approach a therapeutic restrictive diet without falling into those old patterns? And I think this is a fantastic question, and honestly, this is one that I address with clients a lot because this is a very common issue, and there's two reasons for this. One is that if you have a history of restrictive eating or dieting, restricting calories, things like that, you likely have nutrient deficiencies and metabolic dysregulation from under-eating calories and not getting enough nutrient-dense foods in your diet for a long period of time. And when you have metabolic dysfunction and low nutrient status, it contributes to worsening mental and physical health, right? And so a lot of people end up having to do some kind of a therapeutic diet when they have a history of these habits. The other reason is that, unfortunately, and I talk about this a bit in my last video on eating disorders as well, the current paradigm in the mental health world when you have an eating disorder is to call recovery, I eat all foods without discrimination. And this includes foods that I would actually consider non-foods, right? These are inventions of a highly processed Western diet that have just been in our food system for the last couple hundred years. Oh, doggy! I love that. So, both the mental health world, which works on treating eating disorders, and the nutrition wellness world, which sometimes is actually just repackaged diet culture, both contribute to this issue, right? Unfortunately, a lot of people in the nutrition and wellness community report this very diet culture, purity-focused, aesthetic-focused mentality that is... I'm so distracted. I love this. It's happening by me. That exacerbates restrictive eating habits and contributes to one of the many root causes of eating disorders that a lot of people have. And then, in terms of recovery from these eating disorders, a lot of mental health practitioners will promote eat everything, which also leads to increasing mental health issues and sometimes in the long term, increased behaviors of disordered eating. Because eating a lot of these processed and really problematic foods that are not in line with our evolutionary physiology contributes to mental health issues. And so I'm not casting blame at anyone. I think that people on all sides of this spectrum are not being helpful. And so my approach tries to take a different mentality. And basically, what I want to really emphasize here is that this is sometimes a situation of two things looking really similar on paper, really similar on a surface level, but being completely different when you take into account the mindset around it and the context around it. And this is true of a lot of things in our world, and we really need to be mindful about these issues of nuance and context and mindset, because it makes every difference when it comes to these kinds of issues. So, first of all, I always tell people who come to me and they are looking to actually heal their mental and physical health, but they have a history of restrictive eating habits, which has probably contributed in one way or another to their symptoms. I tell them that you are going to need to refeed a huge amount of nutrients and calories as we start this process. So, from my perspective, taking a therapeutic dietary approach is not restrictive at all, because I'm telling you we need to really overcompensate for your history and give you a ton of calories and gives you a ton of nutrients. It also might mean cutting out highly processed, high sugar, highly inflammatory foods that are contributing to some of the symptoms that you're dealing with. And I explain more about that, like I said, in my last video on eating disorders. So again, go and check that out if you want more information about the physiological aspect of it. So again, on paper, it may look restrictive because I may be taking out processed foods or high carbohydrate, low nutrient foods, but I'm going to be really emphasizing high calorie, high nutrient foods to actually help with what have been the result of a history of restrictive eating, which is likely metabolic dysfunction and low nutrient status. Now, the key to approaching this is really thinking about the psychological work that you need to do to actually rebuild your relationship with food. And I actually don't think this attitude of you've recovered if you'll eat any food indiscriminately really makes sense, because you haven't actually addressed the ability to discern and have control over yourself and make thoughtful decisions for yourself without falling into a restrictive pattern, right? To me, that would actually be eating disorder recovery. But just this all or nothing, indiscriminate, if you ever restrict any food group or any particular food, that means you still have an eating disorder? No, that makes no sense. It means that you are using a completely different mindset when you are deciding which foods are going to optimize your health. So the key is you do have to do a lot of deep psychological work to actually examine this stuff on a really, really deep level. And so basically it comes to building self-awareness of when you are using any terms or words or phrases or beliefs that have to do with the moral aspects of different foods or different food groups, or your worthiness in relation to different foods and different food groups. Because once we get into issues of morality and worthiness, that is not about the physiological properties of foods and how they're going to benefit you or not benefit you, right? This becomes a belief system and thought patterns and perception of yourself, and these kinds of things can be reworked. So a lot of people who have habits or histories of restrictive eating, they have come to associate certain foods as bad or like impure, right? You see like the judgmental, moral language around worth that is happening in the way you're thinking about this. Or you're looking at yourself as bad or unworthy, or embarrassing, in some way because you ate a certain food, right? Or because you are still eating a certain food or food group. So with this mindset, the more foods you restrict and the more or the less food that you eat, the better you become morally, right? And in a worthy context, right? You feel better about yourself as a person the fewer foods you're eating and the fewer amounts of food you are eating. Until you're able to change this mentality, you are not going to be recovered from your eating disorder. And this does not mean that you have to eat every food. It means that you have to rethink why you are choosing to eat a certain way. And I think this is actually much more difficult work, but this is actually what healing from a restrictive eating habit looks like. So, You have to have a huge amount of self-awareness and self-examination and be really tracking yourself. Like every time you're making a meal, right? To make sure that you are not falling into those old habits of how you are framing your food choices. Therapeutic diets are based on rebalancing your body, rebalancing your blood sugar, rebalancing your microbiome, refeeding nutrients you may be deficient in, nourishing and supporting your organs and other bodily systems. It has nothing to do with guilt, worthiness, purity. It has everything to do with self-love, with desire to do difficult but powerful things for yourself. And so if you are feeling a sense of self-love, and motivation, and a softness and an openness, right? This is a very somatic thing, as well as psychological to be investigating. Like, that's how you are making these choices. If you are feeling guilt and constriction, and kind of a weird adrenaline high about the whole thing, that is coming from this purity mentality. And so, again, it takes a lot of work to rework and unwind these conflations that we make with food, but this is the work we need to do so that we can actually use food to heal, right? And we are not just saying, okay, I just need to throw away any idea that I have control over my choices in a positive way and just eat anything I want and just get sick in other ways, and it's not, yes, I need to do this restrictive diet to heal because I'm a bad person if I don't, right? If you're falling into either of those patterns, that's not recovery. So I hope I've explained this well. Like I said, it's really a lot of nuance, and it's very difficult and refined work. And it's work that I do with my clients a lot. And it takes a lot of reinforcement and a lot of practice. And I think that growing up in our culture, everyone, but especially women, are going to fall into these thinking patterns to some degree. Even if you don't have a very severe history of restrictive eating, a lot of people have these really disordered relationships with food. And so I think for almost anyone, this is a really important thing to start examining and really think about your motivations, about why you're doing what you're doing. I have clients that come to me who are, doing something like keto or GAPS or carnivore, and they really don't need to, right? Like, their health issues aren't actually that severe, but they're doing it because they think, like, oh, if I'm going to be good, I need to really buckle in and dial down. Or they'll start feeling guilty for introducing fruit into their diet when, considering how much they've healed, I think they would actually do fine with fruit in their diet. But, because they've restricted it for so long and they haven't examined these inner dialogues, they feel bad, about reintroducing something. And so if you fall into any of these, like if you hear yourself in what I'm saying, I do encourage you to really start taking the time to examine the roots of where this comes from and start practicing reworking your attitude around this stuff. And I'm happy to help support that process. Like I said, obviously the nutrition world and the eating disorder world overlaps, and although some people have accused me of promoting disordered eating, I don't agree, because again, to me, it's all the mentality and the mindset in which you approach it with. So I'm really curious on everyone's thoughts, and as always, if you want me to do a video about a specific topic, please leave a comment or email me, and I will add it to my list. Thanks, everyone.